My guest is Jay Richards. He's the director. You know, if I go through all his credentials, we're going to have a podcast in and of itself, so I can't do that. But anyway, he's the director of the DeVos Center for Life, Religion, and Family. He's the senior research fellow in religious liberty and civil society at the Heritage Foundation. He's senior fellow at the Discovery Institute. He's executive editor of The Stream. He's an editor, an author, and that of more than a dozen books. I want you to talk just a few moments about regulation. So many people are talking about the need to regulate AI. If you take this, as you do in the book, to other regulations where during the Obama administration, for example, you had, 20,000 regulations that were supposed to enhance the American dream, but actually detracted from it.
Yeah. And so, of course, it should be clear I'm not an anarchist. I think we need the proper laws and rules and regulations in order to live a fulfilling life. We don't want this sort of state of nature, this law of the jungle. Nevertheless, we very often add regulations, which are kind of coercive rules that the government enforces on certain kinds of economic activity, on the assumption that it's going to help, but without working out the implications of what it actually does. And so we end up with all these regulations that actually do far more harm than good. I'm here right outside Washington, D.C. right now, and I can tell you that the vast majority of those regulations in the Federal Register, nobody really thought carefully about the implications of those. And this is one of these things. And so even people like Elon Musk have talked about, well, maybe we need to regulate and control the development of artificial intelligence. But before we even answer, should there be regulation, I want to say, now, why do you think that this should be regulated? And very often what they're saying is they don't want it to become conscious and become Skynet and kill us all off, right? So the very purpose for which they're advocating regulation is based upon this misconception about what the technology is. Now, I do think that there should be laws. I mean, I'll be honest. I don't think that I would be perfectly happy if the federal government banned TikTok, for instance, not because I think they should be banning private technology, but because in this case, I think it's spyware from the Chinese government. But in general, this idea that we're going to control the development of artificial intelligence, not only does it not really make any sense, but we need to be really good at artificial intelligence. We need to be really good at developing the chips and developing the software that does this. Because trust me, there are bad people in the world. There are communist regimes elsewhere in the world that are doing this as well. And so the last thing we want to do is hobble ourselves technologically. And so any kind of debate we want to have about regulation should at least be based upon what it actually is. And a lot of the talk I've heard about regulating AI is based upon these kind of mythological predictions that it's going to do something that it actually is not going to do.
Do you worry about, I probably shouldn't use the word dumb, but ill-informed people making the regulations? You sort of alluded to that, but I think this is one of the concerns that I have is that we saw this with COVID. We see this in all kinds of areas. You have people that have not exercised critical thinking faculties producing regulations that become counterproductive.
Absolutely. I mean, I assume that's the only way that this could possibly happen. I mean, Hank, in 2013, I wrote a book called Infiltrated, which is at the 5th anniversary of the financial crisis, to kind of assess, okay, what happened in the crisis and what were the regulations? We ended up with this law called Dodd-Frank that actually made the situation worse. The problem was that banks were acting in a particular way and using these particular securities and not assessing the proper risks, in part because some of the big ones knew they'd probably get bailed out if they got into trouble. Turns out that's what happened. Dodd-Frank, rather than saying, okay, no longer are we going to allow banks to think that they're going to get bailed out, we designated these big entities, systemically important financial institutions. So we made it official. The very thing that had caused the problem, we made official. That is just, it's not necessarily the people doing this were dumb. It's that they don't understand the implications of what they're doing. And in fact, sometimes really smart people do this stuff, but they're not capable of actually anticipating these things very well. And so that's why I always say, look, assess any regulation. Do the benefits exceed the costs? And are you in the position to be able to anticipate both the benefits and the costs they're coming, or you just kind of just guessing it based on your moral intuitions. I suspect 90% of what we have on the books of the Federal Register would not be there if everyone were forced to exercise that kind of intellectual discipline.